The thundering hooves and splintering wood of a Hollywood chariot race are unforgettable, but the real spectacle was not the crash. It was the machine that made the crash possible. Beneath the cinematic dust was a vehicle so advanced. It was the Formula One car of the ancient world. How did Roman engineers craft a wooden missile that could outpace and outmaneuver every competitor? By the end of this, you will understand the precise engineering secrets that transformed simple wood and iron into an instrument of legendary speed. We are going to dissect every component, from the revolutionary spoked wheel that defied physics to the driver's terrifying, balanced stance over the axle. What hidden flaw in its brilliant design made every victory a brush with death? What single material breakthrough gave it an unstoppable edge? The answers redefine this iconic symbol. What does it say about a civilization that engineered its entertainment to the very edge of catastrophe? This machine had a name, the chorus, a word that meant pure, distilled motion. It is crucial to understand we are not talking about the heavy, armored war chariots of earlier empires, or the ornate ceremonial carts used in triumphs. The racing chorus was a different beast entirely, a specialist tool forged in the white-hot crucible of the Circus Maximus. Its sole purpose was to win a specific, brutal contest, the 7-lap race where a single mistake meant disaster. Picture the basic silhouette, a tiny, open basket barely large enough for a man's feet, perched precariously on 2 enormous wheels. There were no seats, no rails for safety, no decorative panels. This stark simplicity was not a lack of sophistication. It was the very essence of its genius. Every splinter of wood, every strip of leather, every ounce of its weight was dedicated to a single, ruthless objective: achieving maximum speed and razor-sharp agility. It was built for victory at any cost, a philosophy that extended from its engineering to the life of the man who drove it. To understand this unstable speed, we must start at its literal center, the axis. This was not just a simple wooden rod. The axle was the spinal column of the entire machine, a thick, solid beam of seasoned hardwood, usually ash or oak for its incredible strength. It was the only fixed point on the chariot, the one component that did not move. Everything else pivoted, turned, or balanced upon it. Crucially, and this is a detail of terrifying importance, the axle was not centered under the platform. It was positioned at the very rear edge of the carpentum. This meant the driver stood directly over, or even slightly behind, the axle. Picture balancing on a log floating in water, with most of your weight behind its pivot point. This created a state of perpetual, controlled instability, a machine that wanted to tip backwards at a moment's notice. That dangerous lean was not a flaw. It was the secret to its agility. By shifting his weight just slightly, the driver could influence the entire balance of the chariot, helping to lift the inside wheel during a turn. But this rear-weighted design came at a catastrophic cost, a vulnerability we will return to. Bolted directly atop this axle was the carpentum, the platform. Forget any image of a spacious cart. This was a small, curved floorboard, little more than a semicircular basket of woven withes or thin wood, just large enough for a man to plant his feet. There were no sides, no seat, no handles. The driver stood here, his legs absorbing the violent shocks of the track, his only anchor being the leather reins wrapped tightly around his torso. The carpentum's lightness was absolute, as every unnecessary ounce was a penalty against speed. Projecting forward from this minimal platform was the timo, the draft pole. This was a long, sturdy wooden beam, often a single piece of timber carefully selected for its straight grain and flexibility. It acted as the chariot's outstretched arm, connecting it to the power source. At its front end, it held the ergum, the yoke. This was a carved wooden crossbar that rested across the necks of the two central horses in the team. The yoke distributed the pulling force evenly and allowed for precise steering, as the driver's tension on the reins guided the horses' heads. The entire pulling force of the team, sometimes 4, 6, or even more horses, was transmitted through this wooden pole directly into the heart of the chariot. And finally, mounted on the ends of that critical rear axle, were the rodi, the wheels. Here, Roman engineering left the ancient world behind. These were not the solid, heavy discs used for centuries. These were spoked wheels, a masterpiece of geometric distribution. By replacing solid wood with a carefully calculated ring of slender spokes, usually 6 or 8, radiating from a central hub to a bent wooden rim, the engineers achieved the impossible. They created a wheel that was both incredibly strong and astonishingly light. A lighter wheel meant less rotational mass, which meant the horses could accelerate faster and maintain higher speeds with less effort. The rim itself was then sheathed in an iron tire, a continuous metal band heated until it expanded, fitted over the wood, and then quenched with water. As it cooled, the metal contracted, clamping the entire wheel assembly together with immense force, creating a unit of phenomenal durability. This iron rim also bit into the track surface, providing crucial grip during those deadly turns. So we have our complete anatomy: a rear-weighted axle, a minimal platform, a long draft pole, and 2 revolutionary spoked wheels. Each part a triumph of material science. Each part a calculated risk. Together, they formed a harmony of opposing forces, a balance between stability and chaos, where victory was measured in inches and seconds. But one of these components held a secret so advanced, it would not be matched for over 1,000 years. That revolutionary wheel was a symphony in wood and iron. To appreciate its genius, we must first understand what it replaced. For centuries, across many civilizations, the chariot wheel was a solid disc, a thick slice of a tree trunk. This design was incredibly strong and simple to make, but it came with a crushing penalty: weight. A solid wheel was massively heavy, requiring enormous effort from the horses just to get it rolling. It was like asking a sprinter to run with heavy logs strapped to their feet. The Romans, masters of pragmatic engineering, looked at this problem and saw an opportunity for radical efficiency. They adopted and perfected the spoked wheel, a design that had existed elsewhere but which they refined into a high-performance component. The principle was one of intelligent distribution. Instead of using a solid, heavy mass of material, they replaced it with a carefully calculated framework. Imagine the difference between a solid stone table and one with elegant, sturdy legs. Both can hold weight, but one uses a fraction of the material and is far easier to move. That was the leap. By carving away everything that wasn't essential for structural integrity, Roman wheelwrights achieved something miraculous. They created a wheel that was perhaps 1/3 the weight of its solid predecessor. This was not a minor improvement, it was a transformation. Lighter wheels meant the horses could accelerate faster, reach higher top speeds, and maintain that pace for longer with less fatigue. In a race decided by fractions of a second, this was the ultimate advantage. But building such a lightweight component to survive the punishment of the circus was an engineering tightrope walk. The construction was a meticulous, layered process. It began with the hub or nave, the central cylinder of hardwood into which the axle was fitted. This was the heart of the wheel, taking the constant rotational stress and friction. Around this hub, The craftsmen would carefully mortise or slot the ends of the spokes. Typically, there were 6 or 8 spokes, always an even number to balance the forces. These spokes were not simple dowels. They were carved from carefully selected, seasoned wood like ash or elm, chosen for a rare combination of qualities. They needed to be flexible enough to absorb shock without snapping, yet rigid enough to never buckle under load. Each spoke was a precisely tapered beam, thicker at the hub for strength and thinner at the rim to save weight. The outer ends of these spokes then connected to the felloe, the bent wooden segments that formed the wheel's outer circle. Creating a perfect, circular felloe from straight wood was an art in itself, involving steaming and bending the wood before joining the segments together. Finally, the entire assembly was bound in that iron tire, the heated metal band that shrank as it cooled, clamping every joint with tremendous force and creating a single, incredibly resilient unit. The true test came on the track. At high speed, hitting a rut or a stone, the wheel had to withstand impacts that would shatter lesser designs. The spoked wheel's brilliance was in its ability to flex and rebound, distributing shock across its entire network of members rather than concentrating it in one spot. It was a perfect balance of opposing needs: lightness for speed, strength for survival. This wooden circle was more than a part. It was the enabling technology that made the Roman racing chariot possible. Without it, the entire machine would have been too slow, too cumbersome, too ordinary. But even this masterpiece of engineering had a dangerous partner, a component that turned raw speed into controlled, and often uncontrollable, violence. The iron tire was the final, defining lock on this masterpiece of wood. Known as the Tyrus Farius, this was not a simple strip of metal nailed in place. It was the culmination of a process so clever it borders on alchemy, a technique called thermofitting. The wheelwright would begin by forging a continuous iron band, its circumference meticulously calculated to be just slightly smaller than the wooden wheel it was meant to encase. This presented an obvious problem. How do you fit a smaller metal ring over a larger wooden circle? The answer lay in controlled violence. The iron band was heated in a forge until it glowed a dull red, its metal molecules expanding with the intense energy. At this critical moment, the craftsmen would quickly lift the expanded, pliable band and hammer it onto the waiting wooden fellow. For a few seconds, it would sit there, a loose metal collar around the wood. Then came the quenching. They would douse the entire assembly with water or oil. The sudden cooling caused the iron to contract violently, shrinking back to its original, smaller size with immense force. This shrinking action did not just surround the wheel, it actively compressed it. The iron band became a vise of incredible power, clamping down on the wooden fellow, which in turn squeezed the spokes tighter into the hub. This thermofitting process transformed a collection of individual wooden parts into a single, monolithic unit of phenomenal strength. The tension was now a permanent, built-in feature, a stored energy that fought against any force trying to pull the wheel apart. It was self-reinforcing. The harder the wheel was struck, the tighter the iron band gripped. Contrast this with earlier methods of securing wheels, like binding the rim with wet leather that would shrink as it dried, or using softer bronze strips. Leather wore out quickly under friction and was vulnerable to moisture. Bronze was expensive and not as durable. The iron tire was a revolution in material science. It was immensely hard, resisting the abrasive grind of the track surface far better than any organic material. This reduced friction, allowing the wheels to roll more freely, and drastically cut down on wear, meaning a chariot could race season after season without its wheels disintegrating. That iron rim biting into the sand and dirt of the track also provided a crucial measure of grip, especially when leaning into a turn at full speed. But this brilliant solution also had a dark side, a relentless, hidden stress that would ultimately reveal the chariot's greatest weakness. That iron tire created a wheel of immense strength, but it was anchored to a component designed for controlled disaster. The axle was the chariot's pivot point of danger, a solid wooden bar that did not rotate. Unlike a modern car axle that spins with the wheels, the Roman axle was fixed rigidly to the carpentum, the chariot bed. The wheels themselves spun freely on the ends of this stationary beam, their hubs rotating around it. This design had one immediate, brilliant advantage. It pushed the wheels out to the very edges of the vehicle, creating a wider track width. A wider stance, like an athlete planting their feet apart, provides greater lateral stability, helping to prevent the chariot from rolling over during sharp turns. But this stability came with a terrifying trade-off. Because the axle was fixed directly to the platform, the entire carpentum had to sit above the level of the axle to clear the spinning wheels. This meant the driver's platform was perched high off the ground, significantly raising the chariot's center of gravity. Think of the difference between a low-slung sports car and a tall, narrow delivery van. One can corner at high speed, the other risks tipping over if you turn too fast. The Roman racing chariot was that delivery van, a lightweight basket balanced precariously on a high pivot point. Every turn at speed became a physics problem, a battle between centrifugal force trying to fling the chariot outward and the driver's shifting weight trying to keep the inside wheel planted. The materials chosen for this critical component were a testament to the stresses it endured. The axle itself was typically hewn from a single, dense piece of oak or ash, woods renowned for their ability to withstand tremendous bending forces without snapping. But where the wheel hub met the axle, friction was the enemy. A wooden hub grinding directly on a wooden axle would quickly generate heat, wear down, and seize up, leading to catastrophic failure. The Roman solution was both simple and sophisticated. They fitted the ends of the axle with caps or sleeves made of bronze or iron. These metal sleeves acted as bearings, providing a hard, smooth surface for the wooden wheel hub to rotate against. A small amount of animal fat or olive oil would be used as lubricant, further reducing friction. This allowed the wheels to spin with remarkable freedom, translating the horse's raw power directly into forward motion with minimal loss. So we have a paradox, a fixed axle that created a stable base, but also forced the chariot into a dangerously tall, tippy posture. It was a calculated risk, an acceptance of inherent instability in exchange for the agility needed to win. The driver didn't just steer the horses. He constantly fought this physics, leaning his body as a counterweight, feeling the chariot lean with him, dancing on the very edge of traction. Every component so far, the spoked wheel, the iron tire, the fixed axle, was a masterpiece of engineering that also introduced a deadly variable. And they all converged on one moment, the turn around the spina, where victory and disaster were separated by the thickness of an iron rim. Perched atop this unstable axle was a platform of breathtaking minimalism. The carpentum, the chariot bed, was less a vehicle and more a suggestion of one. It provided just enough space for a man to plant his feet, shoulder width apart, and absolutely nothing more. Constructed from lightweight wooden planks, or in some cases, a basket-like weave of tough leather strips, its entire purpose was to be an anchor point for the driver's weight, not a place of rest or safety. There were no sides, no protective railings, not even a rudimentary seat. To stand in a racing chariot was to occupy a state of perpetual, active balance. The driver did not ride. He performed a constant, full-body negotiation with the machine beneath him, his legs acting as living shock absorbers against the violent jolts of the track. His only physical connection to the chariot, beyond the soles of his boots on that small wooden platform, was the leather reins. These were not simply held in the hands, they were wrapped multiple times around the driver's torso, binding him to the team of horses in a visceral, physical pact. His body became the final link in the steering mechanism, a human gyroscope whose every lean and twist translated directly into guidance for the animals. This complete lack of enclosure served a ruthless logic weight reduction. Every ounce of unnecessary wood or metal was an ounce the horses had to pull, an ounce that slowed acceleration. But it also meant that in a collision or a sudden swerve, there was nothing to stop the driver from being flung out like a stone from a sling. Some archaeological fragments and artistic depictions hint at one small concession to this danger, a curved or raised front lip on the platform. This slight upward sweep at the front may have served a dual purpose. Aerodynamically, it could have helped deflect some of the punishing wind and track debris kicked up by the galloping horses. More practically, it gave the driver's feet a subtle barrier, a few precious inches of wood to brace against during the frantic chaos of a turn. It was not a wall, it was a tactile reference point in a world of blurring motion. So picture the scene, a man standing on a tiny, open-backed tray, his feet braced against a slight curve, his body lashed to the reins of 4 powerful animals, all balanced on a fixed axle over 2 slender, iron-shod wheels. Every component was engineered for a single, fleeting moment of advantage, and every one of those advantages came with a price paid in constant, mortal risk. The driver's precarious stance was only possible because of a single, unyielding connection to the horses. All that raw animal power, the thunder of a dozen hooves, was funneled into the chariot through one critical component, the draft pole or timo. This was not a simple tow rope. It was the chariot's rigid backbone, a long, stout beam of wood that projected forward from the very heart of the machine. Crafted from a single piece of resilient timber like ash or elm, the timo was engineered to be both incredibly strong and slightly flexible, able to absorb the tremendous shocks and twisting forces without snapping. It was bolted or mortised directly into the front of the carpentum, often reinforced with iron bands at the joint, creating a fixed, unbreakable link. This pole acted as the chariot's outstretched arm, transmitting every ounce of forward pull from the team. But the true genius of the system lay at its far end, where the timo met the horses. Here it terminated in the ergum, the yoke. The yoke was a carved wooden crossbar, shaped to rest comfortably across the necks and shoulders of the 2 central horses in a team, the horses known as the eugales. These were the engine room, the primary power unit. In a standard 4-horse racing team, the eugales did the heavy, direct pulling, while the outer horses, the funnels, were attached by traces, leather straps connected to the chariot's front, adding their power for acceleration and stability. The yoke itself was a masterpiece of ergonomic joinery. It wasn't just a flat bar. It was carefully curved to fit the contours of the horses' bodies, often padded with leather to prevent chafing during the long, grueling races. It was secured to the horses' harnesses, which were sophisticated arrangements of leather straps across the chest and shoulders, designed to maximize pulling efficiency. This entire assembly, the timo and the ergum, formed a rigid triangle of force. When the horses surged forward, Their power traveled straight back along the wooden pole, driving the chariot ahead with direct, immediate response. There was no slack, no delay. This rigid connection also meant that steering was a matter of immense physical negotiation. The driver didn't turn a wheel, he guided the heads of the eugales with tension on the reins. A subtle pull to the left on the left horse's rein would cause that animal to lean into the turn, dragging the entire yoke, the timo, and thus the entire chariot in that direction. But this direct link was a double-edged sword. Every stumble by a horse, every sudden swerve to avoid a competitor, sent a violent jerk directly through the wooden timo and into the chariot's frame. The driver, standing just behind that connection point, would feel every tremor, every shift in balance, as if he were an extension of the horses themselves. The materials had to withstand forces that could tear a lesser vehicle apart. The join where the timo met the carpentum was often reinforced with iron collars and bronze pins, while the yoke itself was lashed and pegged with supreme confidence. This was a system built for instantaneous communication and brutal honesty, where the line between control and catastrophe was as thin as a leather rein. This rigid link to the horses created a machine of raw feedback, a physics equation in motion. The chariot's most dangerous feature was its deliberate imbalance. Remember, the driver stood directly over, or even behind, the fixed rear axle. This placed the majority of the chariot's weight, the driver himself, behind the pivot point. In engineering terms, it created a negative lever arm, a condition where the center of mass is behind the wheel's point of contact with the ground. Under normal, straight-line conditions, this design made the chariot want to tip backwards, its front end lifting like a seesaw with too much weight on one end. This might sound like a catastrophic flaw, but it was precisely calibrated for the circus. That backward tilt was the secret to its legendary cornering ability. During a high-speed turn, centrifugal force tries to push the chariot outward, lifting the inside wheel off the track. This is the moment when most vehicles would roll over. The Roman driver, however, had a countermeasure built into his very stance. By leaning his body forward toward the inside of the turn, he could shift the chariot's center of mass. This forward lean pressed down on the inside wheel, helping to keep it planted and providing crucial grip. It was a dynamic, constant adjustment, a dance with physics performed at a full gallop. Conversely, leaning back could help stabilize a straight-line sprint or control a rear wheel skid. The driver wasn't just a passenger, he was an active counterweight, a living part of the suspension system. This inherent instability was therefore a feature, not a bug. It allowed for sharper, more aggressive turns than a stable, four-square cart could ever attempt. But the cost of this agility was a state of perpetual crisis. There was no neutral position, no safe, balanced cruise. Every second required intense concentration and muscular control to prevent the machine from tipping either forward or backward. A moment's lapse, a misjudged lean, or a sudden bump could overcome that delicate equilibrium. The chariot's design demanded incredible skill because it offered no forgiveness, turning each race into a public demonstration of a man wrestling with the laws of motion, where the penalty for a single mistake was not just losing, but being thrown into the path of oncoming hooves and wheels. The chariot's terrifying dance with physics was only possible because of the materials that held it together. Every piece of wood was selected not for its beauty, but for its specific, almost magical properties in the face of extreme stress. This was not random carpentry. It was a science of timber, where the right tree in the right place meant the difference between a winning turn and a shattered wheel. At the heart of this wooden machine was ash, the athlete's wood. Its long, straight grain gave it an unparalleled combination of flexibility and tensile strength, the ability to bend under load without breaking. This made it the perfect choice for the spokes, those slender beams that had to absorb brutal, repeated impacts from the track. An ash spoke could flex like a bowstring, storing the energy of a bump and then springing back to shape, distributing shock throughout the wheel instead of concentrating it in one spot. That same resilient quality made ash ideal for the Timo, the draft pole. This long beam had to withstand constant twisting and bending forces as the horses pulled and turned, acting like a giant leaf spring to smooth out the ride. Elm, on the other hand, was the wood of compression. Hard, dense, and resistant to splitting, it was the champion for hubs, the central cylinder of the wheel that bore the immense crushing weight of the chariot and driver. The hub was squeezed from all sides, by the axle on the inside and the spokes on the outside. Elm's interlocking grain held fast under this constant pressure, preventing it from cracking apart under the strain. For the axle itself, that solid spinal column, nothing less than oak would do. Oak was the fortress wood, incredibly strong in bending, able to support the entire weight of the chariot and driver without sagging or snapping. Its density and durability meant it could resist the wearing friction of the bronze-bearing sleeves, surviving race after race. The lightweight body of the chariot, the carpentum, was often crafted from woods like beech or willow. Beech was smooth and easy to shape into the curved platform, while willow, with its basket-weaving tradition, could be used in a woven, shock-absorbing form. But cutting down the tree was only the beginning. The true mastery was in the seasoning. Fresh, green wood is full of sap and moisture, making it prone to warping, cracking, and rotting as it dries unevenly. Roman craftsmen would carefully dry their timber for months, sometimes years, in controlled conditions. This slow process allowed the wood to stabilize, shrinking and hardening into a predictable, reliable material. Some evidence suggests they may have used smoke or light charring to further preserve the wood and deter insects. The final touch in this composite structure was the use of organic bindings. Critical joints, especially where spokes met the hub or the timo met the carpentum, might be reinforced with strips of rawhide or sinew. These materials, when soaked and wrapped tightly around a joint, would shrink and harden as they dried, creating a bond that was both incredibly strong and slightly flexible, acting like a natural version of the iron tire's clamping force. The Roman racing chariot was never just wood and iron. It was a carefully assembled ecosystem of materials, each chosen to perform a specific life or death function in the symphony of speed. But all this brilliant engineering was useless without the living engine in front of it. The chariot was a puppet, and the horses pulled the strings. The most common sight in the Circus Maximus was the quadriga, the four-horse team that represented the peak of spectacle and danger. Yet this was just one configuration in a hierarchy of horsepower. Simpler races began with the biga, a two-horse team. This was the entry level, a more manageable pair that allowed a driver to hone his skills with a direct, yoked connection to both animals. Adding a third horse created the triga, a more complex arrangement that introduced an outer trace horse, increasing power but also requiring more nuanced control. But for glory, for pure, unadulterated speed, nothing matched the quadriga. 4 horses at a full gallop created a wall of sound and motion, a blur of muscle and color that defined the Roman race. Managing this team was not a matter of holding 4 reins. It was an exercise in orchestrated chaos. The harnessing system was a masterclass in practical logistics. The two central horses, the Iugales, were the foundation. They were yoked directly to the timo, bearing the solid wooden crossbar on their necks and shoulders. These horses were chosen for their strength, stamina, and steady temperament, as they set the pace and direction for the entire team. Flanking them on either side were the funnels, the outer trace horses. These were not yoked. Instead, they were attached by long leather straps, or traces, that connected their harnesses directly to the front of the chariot itself. The funnels were often the faster, more agile animals, adding explosive acceleration and helping to swing the chariot around the turns. A driver held 4 separate reins, one for each horse, sometimes braided together in pairs for a driver's left and right hand. His task was superhuman. He had to feel the pull of each individual animal, sense which one was tiring, which one was fighting the bit, and adjust his pressure on the reins accordingly, all while balancing on a tiny platform and navigating a packed field. Each horse had its own personality and role, and a winning driver knew them intimately. The outer left horse, in particular, held a position of critical importance during the turns around the meta, the stone markers at each end of the spina. This horse had to swing widest, its trace stretching out, to help pivot the entire chariot without losing momentum. A skilled driver would urge that specific horse forward with a shout or a whip crack, a precise command in the roaring din of the crowd. This was not just driving, it was conducting a living, breathing, and often terrified orchestra at a dead sprint. The leather reins were the only true steering wheel for this wooden missile. These were not simple straps held loosely in the hands that would have been a death sentence at the speeds they traveled. The control system was a full-body commitment, a physical tether that bound the driver's fate directly to the minds of 4 powerful animals. The reins themselves were likely crafted from thick, supple oxhide, treated to resist stretching and to provide a firm, grippy surface. They were threaded through a series of bronze or iron rings mounted on the horse's harnesses, creating a pulley-like system that gave the driver mechanical advantage, allowing him to guide the team with precise, amplified pressure rather than brute strength. But the most critical step came in the moments before the race began. The driver would take the gathered ends of the reins and wrap them multiple times around his own torso, knotting them securely against his lower back or waist. This act transformed him from a pilot into a literal extension of the chariot. His body became the central anchor point for all directional control. With the reins lashed tight, his hands were freed for the only other tool he carried, the flagellum, a short, stiff whip. This was not for cruelty, but for urgent communication. In the deafening roar of the crowd, a shouted command was useless. A sharp crack of the whip on a specific horse's flank was a clear signal for more speed, or a corrective nudge to hold the line. The driver now steered not with his arms, but with the subtle leans and twists of his entire core. To turn left, he would lean his body left, the tension on the reins tightening automatically on the left side horses, guiding them inward. It was an elegant, integrated system that allowed for instantaneous reaction. But this elegant integration created the sport's most horrifying vulnerability. In a crash, when horses panicked and veered suddenly, or when a wheel shattered and the chariot cartwheeled, that secure knot around the driver's waist became a trap. He could not simply let go. The reins were wrapped too tightly, binding him to the chaos. If he was thrown from the platform but not completely clear, he would be dragged behind the terrified, galloping team, bouncing over the hard, packed sand and stone of the track. Historical accounts and inscriptions are filled with references to this specific, gruesome fate, a common epitaph for charioteers. The very system that gave him supreme control in the race guaranteed a brutal death in the accident. It was the ultimate paradox of the design, a connection so intimate it could kill the man who mastered it. Bound to his horses by leather, the charioteer's stance was a sculpture of defiance. He did not crouch or hunch, but stood almost unnervingly upright on that small, curved platform, his feet planted firmly apart for balance. His knees were never locked, always maintaining a subtle, athletic bend. This slight flexion was his only shock absorber, a living suspension that took the brutal, jarring impacts of the track, traveling up through the wooden axle and into his legs. Every rut, every stone sent a tremor through his skeleton, a constant vibration he had to control with the muscles of his thighs and calves. Wrapped tightly around his torso, the reins pulled forward with the immense power of the team, forcing him to lean back slightly against their collective strength. His arms were often extended, not rigidly, but with a fluid tension, feeling the feedback from each horse's mouth through the leather straps. This posture was a full-body dialogue with the machine, a continuous readout of speed, balance, and danger. Tucked plainly into his belt, within easy reach of his right hand, was his only lifeline, the falx. This was a short, curved knife, its blade sharpened on the inside edge like a sickle. Its sole purpose was grimly practical, to cut the reins wrapped around his body if he was thrown and being dragged. In the split-second chaos of a crash, fumbling for that knife and sawing through the tough, tensioned leather was a desperate race against death. His attire offered no illusion of protection. He wore a simple, short tunic, usually in the colors of his racing faction, allowing for maximum freedom of movement. A lightweight leather helmet, sometimes adorned with a crest, was his only head protection, more for identification and to guard against flying debris than to survive a major impact. There were no pads, no chest plates, no reinforced boots. His safety equipment was his own skill, his reflexes, and that single knife. In this way, his body completed the chariot's design. The wooden frame provided structure, the wheels provided motion, but the driver provided the adaptive intelligence. His bent legs were the springs. His shifting weight was the counterbalance. His tension on the reins was the steering linkage. He was not riding a vehicle, he was wearing it, a high-speed exoskeleton where every nerve ending was connected to the outcome. To watch a charioteer was to watch a man performing a continuous, conscious calculation, where bravery was not a dramatic pose, but the quiet, unwavering maintenance of control in a machine built to betray him. That knife was a testament to the speeds he faced. A Roman racing chariot was not just fast, it was a blur on the landscape, a wooden projectile that pushed the very limits of ancient velocity. Modern historians and engineers, piecing together accounts from writers like Pliny the Elder and analyzing the dimensions of tracks like the Circus Maximus, estimate these machines could reach breathtaking speeds on the long straight sections. We are talking about 35 to 40 miles per hour, or 56 to 64 kilometers per hour. To put that in a modern context, imagine racing down a city street on a bicycle with no brakes while standing on a wooden crate. Now imagine doing it on a rutted dirt road, surrounded by other cyclists doing the same, all trying to squeeze through the same narrow turn. That was the reality of the circus. This speed is even more remarkable when you consider the power source. A single, unencumbered racehorse at a full gallop can reach similar speeds, around 40 miles per hour. So how could a chariot pulled by horses and burdened with its own weight and a driver possibly match that pace? The secret lies in the physics of pull versus carry. A horse carrying a rider on its back must support that weight directly with its spine and legs, a significant metabolic cost that limits its top speed and endurance. But a horse pulling a load on wheels is doing fundamentally different work. The chariot's wheels dramatically reduce rolling friction, and the weight is borne by the axle and the ground, not the animal's skeleton. The horse can channel more of its explosive power into pure forward motion. Furthermore, a team of 4 horses divides the load, with each animal contributing its strength to overcome the inertia of the chariot. This allowed the quadriga to accelerate rapidly and sustain a pace that might actually exceed what a single, ridden horse could maintain over the length of a race. The sensation of that speed, however, was not the smooth rush of a modern vehicle. The driver experienced a world of violent, deafening vibration. The iron tires clattered and sang over every stone and seam in the packed sand track. The wooden frame groaned and flexed with each impact. Wind whipped his tunic and threatened to tear the helmet from his head, while a constant storm of sand, grit, and pebbles thrown up by the hooves ahead stung any exposed skin. He wasn't gliding, he was being shaken apart at the seams, every joint rattling, his vision blurred by the pounding rhythm and the cloud of dust. This was speed in its rawest, most physical form, a punishing torrent of noise and motion where control was measured in inches and milliseconds. And all of it was a prelude to the track's most deadly feature, the turn that demanded everything from man, machine, and beast. The true test of the chariot's design was not the straightaway, but the turn. At each end of the long central spina stood the mere, the turning posts. These were not simple markers, but massive, gilded columns often topped with elaborate sculptures or obelisks. For the driver, they were a beacon of danger, the pivot point around which every race was won or lost. The strategy was simple in theory and terrifying in execution. Take the turn as tightly as possible. The ideal line brought the chariot's left wheel within a hair's breadth of the stone base, with the outer left horse almost brushing the post with its body. This shaved precious feet, and therefore seconds, off the lap distance. But to achieve this, the chariot had to perform a maneuver that pushed every one of its engineered features to the absolute limit. As the team entered the turn at full speed, centrifugal force tried to hurl the chariot outward in a wide, losing arc. The driver fought this by leaning his entire body sharply to the left, toward the inside of the curve. His weight shift, combined with a precise pull on the left rein, urged the yoked horses to lean into the turn. The chariot's lightweight construction and that deliberately high center of gravity meant it responded instantly, tilting dramatically onto its 2 right wheels. For a heart-stopping moment, the left wheels would actually lift off the track, the entire machine balanced on a knife's edge of momentum and grip. The wide wheelbase, created by the fixed axle, provided just enough lateral stability to prevent a complete rollover. The iron tires on the 2 right wheels bit in the sand, searching for traction as the wooden frame groaned under the stress. This was where the spoked wheels proved their worth, their flexible spokes absorbing the immense sideways pressure. The driver's body was the final, crucial counterweight, a human pendulum keeping the inside wheels from rising too high. If his timing was perfect, and his horses responded as one, the chariot would slingshot around the post and catapult back on the straight. This maneuver, repeated 7 times a race, was why the chariot was built with such calculated instability. A stable cart could not corner like this. But the cost of this capability was a constant flirtation with disaster. The narrow track at the turn created a funnel of chaos, with multiple teams converging at once, all aiming for the same perfect line. Collisions were inevitable. The Romans had a specific, grim word for these wrecks, naufragia, shipwrecks. A single clipped wheel against the stone post could shatter spokes and send a chariot cartwheeling into the path of others. A panicked horse could veer outward, tangling traces and yokes, creating a domino effect of splintering wood and falling bodies. In an instant, the turn could become a tangled mass of wreckage, a snarl of broken axles, overturned chariots, and thrashing horses, with drivers trapped in their reins. The very design that enabled the winning turn also engineered the spectacular, deadly crash. The medae were not just posts, they were an altar where the chariot's brilliant virtues and fatal flaws were sacrificed together for the crowd's roar. The wreckage from a naufragia was not the end for a chariot, but a brutal test of its support system. While the crowd roared and the next race lined up, a different kind of team sprang into action in the hippodromus, the sprawling stable and workshop complex hidden behind the soaring stands of the circus. This was the pit crew of antiquity, a hive of specialized labor where victory was forged long before the starting gates opened. The hippodromus was far more than a simple barn. It was a combined garage, engineering bay, and hospital for both horses and machines. Here, chariots were not merely stored, they were perpetually resurrected. The sheer violence of a race meant that no machine ever finished a day in the same condition it started. Every component was subject to forces that loosened, cracked, and wore. Maintenance was not a weekly chore, it was a continuous, urgent ritual. After each run, grooms would lead the lathered, trembling horses to be cooled and cared for, while the chariot itself was wheeled into the hands of the craftsmen. Their first task was a meticulous inspection, running hands over every inch of wood and iron, feeling for the telltale signs of failure. The iron tires were checked for any loosening. Remember, these were held on solely by the immense shrink-fit tension. A skilled wheelwright would tap the iron rim with a hammer, listening to the ring. A dull, flat sound could indicate the wood beneath had compressed or the tire had stretched, breaking that critical bond. If it was loose, the terrifying process of thermofitting had to be repeated, heating the band, reseating it, and quenching it once more. Spokes were examined for hairline cracks, their surfaces felt for the slightest splintering that could lead to a catastrophic snap at full load. A cracked spoke was not repaired, it was replaced, requiring the craftsman to carefully remove the iron tire, extract the damaged piece, carve and fit a new one from seasoned wood, and reassemble the entire wheel. This was precision work under immense time pressure. The joints where the timo met the carpentum, constantly stressed by twisting forces, were inspected for any movement. Lashings of rawhide or sinew, which had dried and hardened into a bond stronger than many glues, would be checked. If they showed wear, the craftsman would soak new strips in water, wrap the joint tightly, and let it dry, knowing the shrinking material would pull the connection even tighter. This was organic engineering at its finest, using the properties of the material itself to create a self-tightening repair. The workforce behind this was a guild of experts as specialized as any modern racing team. The wheelwright, the rotarius, was a master of geometry and material, understanding the exact taper of a spoke and the perfect circumference of a felloe. The carpenter, or faber, shaped the axle and carpentum, selecting woods for their specific duties. The blacksmith, the faber ferrarius, was not just a maker of tires, but of the bronze-bearing sleeves, the reinforcing bands, and the driver's life-saving falx knife. These men were not anonymous laborers. Their skills were renowned, and a successful racing faction would pay handsomely to secure the best. A driver's courage was the public face of victory, but it was the silent, meticulous work of these craftsmen in the dusty hippodromus that made that courage possible. They were the guardians of the machine's fragile integrity, the ones who ensured that when the gates dropped, the only thing between the driver and disaster was the quality of their unseen work. Yet this masterpiece of speed did not spring fully formed from Roman soil. Its lineage winds back through the dusty tracks of history, a story of adaptation and ruthless improvement. The Romans were not the inventors of the chariot, but they were its ultimate refiners. They inherited the basic concept from their sophisticated northern neighbors, the Etruscans, who themselves had adopted and adapted the chariot from the Greeks. The early Etruscan models were often heavier, used more for ceremony and warfare than for pure racing. When the Romans embraced the spectacle of the circus, they looked at these existing designs with a uniquely pragmatic eye. They saw not a sacred object, but a machine with flaws to be corrected. The Greek and Etruscan wheels, for instance, often used bronze tires or even just reinforced wood. The Romans saw the weakness, the rapid wear, the lack of grip. Their answer was the iron tire, that brilliant shrink-fit band of metal that gave their chariots a durability and performance edge no competitor could match. This was not a minor upgrade. It was a material revolution that redefined the vehicle's potential. Another key Roman improvement was in the geometry of balance. While earlier chariots often had a more centered or even forward-placed axle, Roman engineers pushed it to the extreme rear. This amplified the inherent instability, yes, but it also maximized the driver's ability to act as a counterweight during turns. They optimized the weight distribution not for safety or comfort, but for one thing alone: shaving critical milliseconds off a lap time. They understood that in the circus, agility was more valuable than stability. Over the centuries of the empire, as chariot racing exploded into a hyper-professionalized, corporate-sponsored industry, the design likely underwent further subtle evolution. The carpentum, already minimal, may have become even lighter, using more advanced woodworking techniques or even thinner, stronger materials. The spoked wheel, perhaps standardized at 6 spokes for most racing, might have seen experiments with 8 for certain teams or track conditions. The yoke and harness system would have been endlessly tweaked for better ergonomics and efficiency, reducing chafing on the horses to preserve their energy. These were not dramatic, visible changes, but the quiet, incremental refinements of a mature technology pushed to its absolute limits by enormous financial stakes. The imperial racing chariot was not a static relic. It was a living piece of sports engineering, constantly evolving in the relentless pursuit of victory, a testament to a civilization that could take a good idea and hone it into a legend. The legend of the racing chariot is written in wood and leather, materials that vanish with time. This creates a profound silence in the archaeological record. We have no intact Roman racing chariot pulled from the earth, no complete cuirass waiting in a museum case with its paint still bright. The very perfection of its lightweight, organic construction sealed its fate, destined to rot away in the damp soil or be consumed by fire. What remains, then, is a ghost, reconstructed from fragments and echoes. But those fragments tell a compelling story. Some of the most stunning discoveries are not Roman at all, but come from their predecessors. The breathtaking Etruscan bronze chariot from Monteleone, dating to around the 6th century before the Common Era, is a ceremonial masterpiece covered in intricate mythological panels. While not a racing machine, its form is a direct ancestor, a frozen moment of the spoked wheel, the carpentum, and the draft pole cast in enduring metal. It shows us the foundational geometry that the Romans would later strip down for speed. More direct evidence comes from rare, solemn contexts, the ceremonial burials of warriors and chieftains across Europe. In these tombs, chariots were sometimes interred whole as a symbol of status and power for the afterlife. The anaerobic conditions of certain bogs and deep graves have preserved astonishing details. At sites like Lyn Cerrig Bog in Wales, archaeologists have recovered not just metal parts, but actual fragments of the wooden frame itself, showing the mortise and tenon joints, the curvature of the felloe, and the precise shaping of the axle. These funeral chariots are often of a heavier, warlike design, but their construction principles are the same. The true smoking guns, however, are the small, hard components that survived the centuries where wood turned to dust. The most common find is the iron tire. Scattered across former Roman territories, from Britain to Syria, these corroded metal rings are instantly recognizable. Their diameter, consistently around 3 feet or about 1 meter, confirms the scale of the racing wheel. The thickness and width of these iron bands speak to the immense forces they were designed to withstand. Even more telling are the bronze hub fittings, the modioli. These beautifully cast sleeves were designed to cap the ends of the axle, providing that smooth, durable bearing surface for the spinning wheel hub. Finding one is like finding a piston ring from a vintage race car. It is a signature component of a high-performance machine. Perhaps the most valuable evidence comes not from full-sized wrecks, but from miniatures. The Romans, like many ancient peoples, had a tradition of placing detailed votive models in temples or tombs. These terracotta and bronze replicas, though small, were made with astonishing accuracy. A terracotta model from a tomb might show the exact curve of the carpenter's front lip, the way the reins were wrapped around the driver's torso, and the number of spokes in each wheel. A bronze figurine of a charioteer captures his upright, braced stance with perfect clarity. These are not toys, they are three-dimensional blueprints, created by people who knew every splinter of the real thing. By combining these puzzle pieces, the ghost takes solid form. The iron tire gives us the wheel's circumference and strength. The bronze hub fittings reveal the precision of the axle assembly. The models provide the complete proportions and posture, and the rare preserved wood from burial sites confirms the joinery. Together, they prove that the chariot described by poets and historians was not a myth, but a meticulously engineered fact, a machine whose brilliance was so complete that only its toughest bones were left for us to find. That ghost of a chariot can only whisper its secrets until we give it a body. To truly understand the machine, we had to build it again. This is the realm of experimental archaeology, where historians swap books for tools and engineers step into ancient workshops to ask the ultimate question: would it actually work? One of the most ambitious projects was led by a team from the British Museum and a skilled wheelwright. Their goal was not to create a museum display piece, but a fully functional, race-ready replica based on every scrap of evidence we possessed. They started with the same materials the Romans used, selecting seasoned oak for the axle, ash for the spokes and draft pole, and elm for the hub. They hand-forged the iron tire, heating it in a charcoal forge, and quenching it on the wooden wheel with a terrifying hiss of steam, watching it shrink into that vice-like grip. Every decision was a debate with the past, interpreting the angle of a joint from a bronze model or the thickness of a plank from a waterlogged fragment. The first major shock came during assembly. The rearward placement of the axle, so clear in diagrams, felt absurd in practice. When they mounted the lightweight carpentum onto that fixed beam at the very back, The entire structure wanted to tip over backwards the moment any weight was placed on it. The team realized that without the constant forward pull of the horses and the driver's active counterbalance, the chariot was fundamentally incomplete and unstable. It was a machine that only made sense in motion. The real test came with a team of horses. Modern drivers, even experienced equestrians, had to learn an entirely new language of balance. Wrapping the reins around their torso was the first hurdle, an act of trust that felt dangerously restrictive. Then they had to stand, not sit, absorbing the bone-jarring shocks through their legs. But the most profound revelation was in the handling. At a walking pace, the replica felt twitchy and nervous, but as the horses moved into a trot and then a canter, the chariot seemed to come alive. The instability transformed into responsiveness. A slight lean from the driver produced an immediate change in direction. The spoked wheels absorbed bumps with a graceful flex, and the iron tires provided a firm, gritty connection to the ground. When they pushed it to a gallop on a straight track, the speed was startling, easily matching the estimates from historical texts. The wind roar, the thunder of hooves, and the constant high-frequency vibration from the chassis created an overwhelming sensory experience that no written account could fully convey. Then they attempted a turn. Even at a moderate speed, the physics became vividly, terrifyingly clear. As the driver leaned in, the inside wheels lifted, the chariot tilting onto a two-wheel balance with alarming ease. The wide track from the fixed axle prevented a rollover, but the margin for error was vanishingly thin. The team confirmed what the ancient sources implied. This was not a vehicle you drove. It was a force you negotiated with every muscle and nerve. The replica proved the design was not just effective, it was brutally optimal. Every calculated risk, from the rear axle to the minimal platform, served a demonstrable purpose in achieving speed and agility. It also proved the horrific reality of a crash. In a controlled test, a simulated broken wheel caused the chariot to dig in and cartwheel with violent force, demonstrating exactly how a naufragia could scatter debris and bodies across the track. By building it, they moved the chariot from the realm of legend into the world of empirical fact, a machine whose genius was inseparable from its deadly cost. These replica chariots were not built for a museum, but for a team. In the roar of the Circus Maximus, the machine was just one part of a vast corporate machine. The real powerhouses were the factions, the racing stables that were the Scuderia Ferrari of ancient Rome. Forget simple clubs. These were professional syndicates with immense wealth and political influence, organized under four iconic colors: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. Your loyalty to a color was a public identity, a statement that could spark riots in the streets. But behind the fanatical crowds was a cold, logistical empire. A top faction like the Greens or Blues was a sprawling enterprise. It owned vast breeding farms across the empire to supply the best horseflesh, maintained the hippodromus workshops with armies of specialized craftsmen, and employed a roster of drivers, grooms, and trainers. They operated on an industrial scale. Historical records suggest a major faction could stable over 1,000 horses at a time, with specialized animals for different roles, from powerful starters to agile turners. They had to, because the racing calendar was relentless, with dozens of races run in a single day. This scale demanded standardization and excellence. While the core chariot design was set by engineering principles, the factions would have sought every marginal gain. A stable might commission wheels with a specific spoke pattern from their master wheelwright, believing it offered a fraction more resilience. They might insist on yokes carved from a particular grove of ash for its perfect flexibility. The leather for reins and traces would be tanned to a specific suppleness. These were not mass-produced vehicles, but handcrafted tools from a production line dedicated to victory. And at the sharp end of this tool was the charioteer. The most successful, like Gaius Apuleius Diocles, were global superstars. Diocles, who raced for 24 years mostly for the Reds and Whites, won over 1,462 of his 4,257 races. His career winnings, meticulously recorded on a monumental inscription, totaled an almost unbelievable 35 million sesterces, enough to feed the entire city of Rome for a year. These men were not just athletes, they were brands. Their fame would have allowed personal customizations, subtle tweaks to the standard faction design. A champion might have a carpentum platform carved to fit the exact stance of his feet. His reins might be woven with a distinctive pattern for better grip. The wooden frame of his chariot might be painted not just in his faction's color, but adorned with protective symbols or the insignia of wealthy patrons who sponsored him. The chariot was a uniform, but the champion could wear it with personalized armor. This ecosystem of faction, craftsman, and driver perfected the racing machine. The faction provided the resources and relentless innovation. The craftsman provided the material genius, and the driver provided the skill and nerve that turned engineering into legend. In their hands, the chariot was more than wood and iron. It was a vessel for fame, fortune, and immortality that hung by a leather rein. The Roman racing chariot was a specialist, not a generalist. To appreciate its razor-sharp focus, we must see it beside its ancient cousins, machines built for entirely different kinds of work. Take the fearsome Celtic war chariot, a vehicle designed for the chaos of battle, not the packed dirt of a circus. Archaeological finds, like the remains from a chieftain's burial at Lyn Cerrig Bach, reveal a heavier, sturdier construction. These chariots often featured a much larger, enclosed carpentum, sometimes with wicker sides, providing a fighting platform for a warrior to stand beside his driver. They were built for durability over rough terrain and for intimidating charges, where mass and presence mattered more than split-second agility. Their wheels were robust, but they lacked the obsessive weight saving of the Roman spoke design. Similarly, the legendary Persian war chariots, sometimes equipped with scythed wheels, were mobile fortresses, emphasizing armor and terror over pure velocity. They were instruments of shock, meant to break infantry lines, not to win a 7-lap sprint by a nose. The Roman racing cuirass shared the same basic ancestry with these machines, but through centuries of refinement, it had evolved into a different species entirely, a predator adapted to a single, specific environment. A more revealing comparison lies closer to home with the Greek racing chariot. The Greeks were the true pioneers of chariot racing as a public spectacle, and their designs were the direct blueprint Rome inherited. Greek vases and sculptures show vehicles strikingly similar in silhouette, a lightweight platform on 2 spoked wheels. Yet the devil is in the details, and the Roman adaptations tell a story of targeted optimization. Greek chariots often featured a taller, more pronounced dashboard, a curved front panel that rose higher on the driver's shins. This offered slightly more protection from flying debris and perhaps a better brace during turns. The Roman design, however, consistently shows a lower, more minimal front lip. This was not a step backward, but a calculated subtraction. Every inch of that taller Greek dashboard added weight and wind resistance. For the Romans, the marginal gain in protection was not worth the penalty in acceleration. Their philosophy was one of ruthless efficiency, stripping away anything that did not directly contribute to speed or the driver's active control. The most critical differences were forged by the track itself. The Greek hippodrome and the Roman Circus Maximus, while similar in concept, had distinct personalities that shaped their machines. The Circus Maximus was a behemoth, over 600 meters long, but its turns at the medaille were notoriously tight and treacherous. The Roman Chariot's extreme rear axle placement and tippy balance were direct responses to this challenge, allowing for those impossibly sharp pivots around the stone markers. Furthermore, the Roman racing calendar was more packed, the factions more professionalized, and the financial stakes unimaginably high. This environment demanded not just a fast chariot, but a durable one. The Roman adoption of the all-iron tire over the bronze or leather-bound rims sometimes seen elsewhere speaks to this need for relentless, season-long performance with minimal downtime for repairs. The Greek design was a thoroughbred. The Roman version was a thoroughbred engineered for a longer, more brutal racing season. It was optimized for the specific combination of distance, surface, turn radius, and commercial pressure that defined a Roman race day. In the end, the Roman racing chariot stands apart not because it invented the form, but because it perfected it for a single, glorious, and deadly purpose. It was the ultimate expression of a culture that could take a good idea and hone it into a weapon for winning. The true price of victory was measured in gold, not seconds. To field a championship chariot was to command a fortune on wheels. Let us break down the staggering economics. First, the machine itself, a masterpiece of bespoke craftsmanship. The chariot was not mass-produced. Every component was hand-built by guild artisans at the peak of their trade. The wheelwright, the carpenter, the blacksmith, each demanded high wages for their irreplaceable skills. The materials were premium, long-seasoned oak and ash, specially tanned oxhide for the reins, and high-quality iron for the tires. A single racing chariot likely cost the equivalent of a skilled laborer's wages for several years. But the machine was the smallest part of the budget. The real expense came with the living engine. A top racing horse was more valuable than a palace slave. These animals were bred from exclusive bloodlines on imperial stud farms in places like Hispania, North Africa, and Cappadocia. The purchase price for a single promising colt could be astronomical. Then came the years of training by specialist agitators, the cost of feed, stabling, and veterinary care. A first-class 4-horse team represented a capital investment that would dwarf the fortunes of most Roman citizens. And you needed more than one team. A competitive faction required a deep bench of horses to run multiple races a day, and to replace animals injured or killed on the track. Add to this the salaries for the drivers, the grooms, the trainers, and the maintenance crew in the hippodromus. The annual operating budget for a major racing faction like the Blues or Greens would be comparable to funding a small army. This financial reality made chariot racing the exclusive sport of emperors and the super-rich. While the state funded the games themselves as a public spectacle, the racing stables were often privately owned and operated as lucrative businesses. Wealthy patrons, senators, and even the emperors themselves would bankroll factions, not merely for prestige, but for profit and political influence. A winning faction attracted massive betting, sponsorship deals, and prize money. The driver Gaius Apuleius Diocles earned millions, but the faction owners behind him earned far more. This ecosystem transformed a victorious chariot into something beyond a tool. It became a mythical object. A chariot that had carried a champion to multiple victories was not just retired, it was venerated. Its wood was considered touched by fortune. Its wheels possessed a kind of magic. There are accounts of winning chariots or their parts being displayed in temples as votive offerings, or preserved by factions as sacred relics of past glory. The iron tire that had gripped the track in a legendary finish, the draft pole that had flexed under the strain of a final sprint, these were the holy relics of the circus. They were tangible proof of an investment that had paid off in the most public way possible, blending engineering, finance, and superstition into a single, priceless artifact of speed. The chariot we have rebuilt from fragments and logic bears little resemblance to its Hollywood twin. Cinema has draped this machine in thrilling, but often wildly inaccurate, myth. Let us cut through that cinematic dust to see what was really there. Perhaps the most persistent error is the image of scythed wheels, those terrifying blades projecting from the hubs, designed to mow down infantry. This was a real weapon, but it belonged to the Persian war chariot, a specialized battlefield terror device. On the smooth, packed sand of the Circus Maximus, such blades would have been catastrophic. They would catch on the track surface, snag on the spina, or slice into the legs of the other horses during the tight turns. A racing chariot's advantage was agility and speed, not indiscriminate slaughter. Its wheels were clean, elegant circles of wood and iron, engineered for one purpose: to roll faster than anyone else's. The drivers themselves are also almost always misrepresented. Films love to show them clad in gleaming bronze armor, masked helmets, and heavy leather. In reality, a racing charioteer wore almost no protection. His short tunic and light leather cap were for freedom of movement and faction identification, not defense. Bronze armor would have been a death sentence. The added weight would raise the center of gravity even further, making the chariot impossibly tippy. The heat and restriction would sap his strength and flexibility in a race demanding constant, full-body control. His safety was his skill, his balance, and that small knife at his belt, not a suit of metal. He was an athlete in linen, not a warrior in plate. Even the arena itself is frequently misunderstood. The Circus Maximus was not a simple oval with two turns. It was a massive, elongated U-shape, over 600 meters long, with a long central barrier, the spina, running down the middle. The starting gates were at one curved end, and the chariots raced down one long side, around a post at the far end, back down the other long side, and around the post at the starting end, completing a lap. They did this not 3 or 4 times, but 7 laps of that grueling course, each requiring 12 of those death-defying turns around the Medea. This number, 7, was sacred, tied to the 7 planets known to Roman astronomy. The race was a cosmic spectacle, a ritual of endurance as much as a sport. The distance covered was immense, roughly the equivalent of 2.5 modern miles, or about 4 kilometers, all at a full, punishing gallop. These corrections are not just about historical nitpicking. They sharpen our understanding of the machine's true nature. Removing the scythes reinforces its purpose as a pure racing instrument, not a weapon. Stripping away the fictional armor highlights the driver's role as a living counterweight, whose safety depended on grace under pressure, not brute shielding. Understanding the 7-lap ordeal in the true circus explains the relentless need for durability in every component, from the iron tire to the driver's own stamina. The real story is more compelling than the myth, a tale not of generic ancient warfare, but of a specific, breathtaking technology refined for a single, spectacular, and deadly game. The circus was a brutal laboratory, but its innovations did not die in the sand. The engineering principles forged for entertainment escaped the arena, reshaping the everyday world of Roman transportation. The lightweight spoked wheel and the iron tire, perfected for the chariot, became standard features on the heavy carts and freight wagons that crisscrossed the empire's vast road network. A merchant's wagon, or carross, was a workhorse, not a racehorse, but it benefited directly from the circus's obsession with efficiency. By using spoked wheels instead of solid discs, these cargo wagons could carry heavier loads with less effort from the oxen or mules that pulled them. The iron tire's incredible durability meant a merchant's wagon could travel thousands of miles on stone-paved roads without its wheels disintegrating. This was a quiet economic revolution. Faster, more reliable land transport meant goods moved more cheaply, markets connected more easily, and the machinery of empire grew more efficient. The chariot's legacy was not in replicating its speed, but in democratizing its resilience. The knowledge of how to tension fit metal onto wood, of how to balance strength and weight in a rotating frame, became part of the Roman craftsman's fundamental toolkit. This expertise did not vanish with the empire. The dark ages that followed saw a decline in large-scale infrastructure, but the core techniques of wheelwrighting survived in monastic workshops and local forges. The medieval cart, though often heavier and cruder, still relied on the same basic principle of spokes and a metal tire. By the time of the Renaissance, when engineers and artists looked back to classical antiquity for inspiration, they rediscovered not just Roman aesthetics, but Roman mechanics. The intricate clockwork of Renaissance astronomical instruments, the complex geared mechanisms of early machinery, even the first prototypes of wheeled artillery, all required a deep understanding of axles, bearings, and load distribution. The Roman mastery of fitting metal to wood under tension is a direct ancestor to the precision engineering that would later drive the scientific revolution. So we must ask a profound question. Did the Circus Maximus, that temple of visceral spectacle, actually fuel broader Roman engineering genius? The pursuit of speed demanded radical solutions in materials, balance, and dynamics. It created a culture of specialized, high-stakes problem-solving where failure was public and catastrophic. The engineers and craftsmen who served the racing factions were at the cutting edge of their fields, pushing wood and metal to their absolute limits. This culture of innovation, funded by immense wealth and public demand, almost certainly bled into other disciplines. The same mindset that calculated the taper of a chariot spoke could refine the geometry of an aqueduct's arch. The same understanding of friction that created a bronze axle bearing could improve the efficiency of a water-lifting device. The circus was not an isolated entertainment. It was a vortex that drew in the best technical minds of the age and gave them a terrifyingly clear objective: win. The lessons learned in that frenzy of competition became part of Rome's immense engineering legacy, proving that sometimes the road to practical progress is paved by the desperate need to go faster than anyone else. The Roman racing chariot was a single, ruthless equation solved in wood and iron. It was not a general-purpose cart or a weapon of war, but a precision instrument of sport, where every component served the god of speed. The therma-fit iron tire was not just a rim, but a self-tightening vise of metal. The spoked wheel was not just a circle, but a geometric dance of flexibility and strength. The driver was not just a passenger, but a living counterweight, his braced legs the only suspension, his wrapped torso the steering column. This machine was a perfect distillation of Roman technological ambition. a testament to a civilization that could engineer chaos for entertainment. It balanced on the very edge of catastrophe because that edge was where victory was found. In the roar of the Circus Maximus, we see more than a race, we see the Roman mind at play, forging brilliance and brutality into an unforgettable spectacle. So tell me, which part of this ancient design amazed you the most? Was it the physics of the turn, the danger of the reins, or the sheer audacity of building something so perfectly unstable? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten mechanics and mysteries of the ancient world.